You'll often hear cycads referred to as dinosaur plants, and while these slow-growing plants do get portrayed being eaten by giant lizards in portrayals of our ancient planet, that's not quite the case. This is Dr. James Clugston. He's a botanist from the Royal Botanic Gardens, Sydney, and an expert in cycads. I asked him why people think that they're the same as plants that existed tens of millions of years ago.
Cycads are often referred to as dinosaur plants, but strictly speaking, that's not true. Because for something to be a dinosaur plant, it probably has to be 60 or 260 million years old, which is a long time. Now, cycads, what we know today and what we see around us, have only recently evolved in the last 10 to 12 million years. So they're still very old, much older than we are, but their lineage dates back around 270 million years. So they are old ancestrally, so that what we would say is when we see dinosaurs eating plants like cycads, it's something that probably would have happened to their ancestors a long time ago, but these plants retain a lot of characteristics from their ancestors that we see in the fossil record. These things have incredibly complex genetic structures, far more complex than most mammals do. It's just all of this information they've carried on from a very long time. But what we do know about cycads is they've been subjected to multiple extinction events, including the KT extinction event that happened at the end of the Cretaceous period. This is Encephalatus latifrons. Now, this is actually a really cool plant and it has a bit of a sad history. So this occurs in South Africa and it occurs in these really distinct sand dunes. And this plant has very slow growing, really thick, spiky leaves. You don't want to fall in it, it would be quite painful. But in the wild, these plants take around 60 years to produce a cone. And then the female plant only produces a cone every 17 years. This species is reproductively extinct in the wild. It will not naturally reproduce in the wild. So the only way we can reproduce this is within botanic gardens and artificially pollinating them. And this plant is critically endangered, but it's a really cool one. It's a real iconic plant for cycad collectors.
In remote parts of New South Wales, Clugston and his fellow botanists from other botanic gardens around Australia and the US go hunting for cycads. When they find an isolated population, they count how many are there, take samples of their DNA for study, and then use this information to understand just how threatened these species might be.
We were trying to find cycads that haven't been found for a very long time that aren't found in botanic gardens. And they're in the wild, but their populations are decreasing in size due to natural occurrences. This could be removal from land due to farming, or increased fire regimes, or invasive species. So what we want to do is collect some of those and DNA from them so we can keep them in botanic gardens, so we can represent them and create a conservation collection to preserve some of that diversity that's found in the wild. And then we're also going to look at the genetic diversity of these plants and find out how different they are from one or another, and is there any levels of things like inbreeding that could be affecting the long-term viability and diversity of their groups or populations in the wild. A couple of them are considered endangered according to the IUCN, but we use different criteria here in New South Wales, and some of them are threatened species in New South Wales, but not all of them at present. But I will say that that is subjective because the last surveys on these populations were done in the 80s. With plants like cycads, the seeds only have a viability period of about a year to about 2 years. So it means seed banking those seeds is just a waste of time. So in order to conserve plants like cycads, you have to grow them in the living collections of botanic gardens, like what we see around me today in the Royal Botanic Garden, Sydney.
Keeping cycads front of mind for visitors to botanic gardens might be helpful to highlight the conservation challenge facing these rare plants.
It's incredibly important to document the species that we have and understand the diversity of these species, because if we have risks of extinction where you have organisms that go extinct, everything goes extinct for a reason. And sometimes we need to understand why that's happening and why that's occurring, and documenting our history and biological history can help us understand diversity in the wild. Also, if we were to one day find a cycad, that some of the toxins that are found in cycads are particularly useful for humans, humans, we might eventually have a cure for some unknown disease that might be very relevant in the future. And if we lose these plants, we lose this huge gap in our ecosystem and understanding of how things relate.